Jack Monroe tightened his grip on the crowbar, his fingers slick with sweat. The grocery store aisle was dimly lit by the flickering remains of the emergency lighting, casting eerie shadows across the overturned shelves and broken glass. Cans of soup, boxes of cereal, and rotting produce littered the floor. The stench of death clung to the air, thick and suffocating. "Keep quiet," whispered Elena, crouching near the entrance. Her hazel eyes flicked toward the shattered front windows, where the distant groans of the undead echoed through the empty streets. David, the youngest of their group, shoved a half-empty backpack into Jack's hands. "This is all we could find. Anything else is either spoiled or gone." Jack exhaled slowly. Not enough. It was never enough. Food was running low, and water was an even bigger problem. "Let's get out of here," said Chris, his voice a low growl. He was their muscle, a former mechanic turned survivor, and he didn't trust anyone. Especially other survivors. Jack nodded, leading the way toward the rear exit. The city outside was a graveyard of burned-out cars, bloodstains, and half-eaten corpses. The only movement came from the shambling figures dragging their rotting bodies through the debris-strewn streets. They were halfway to the alley when a noise stopped them in their tracks. A gunshot, sharp, close, and followed by the unmistakable scream of a human. Jack cursed. "That's going to bring them right to us. Go! Now," he ordered. They broke into a sprint just as the first infected rounded the corner, their lifeless eyes locking onto fresh prey. Jack yanked open the metal door to the alley. Inside. The others bolted in after him. He slammed the door shut and threw the bolt in place just as a body slammed into it from the other side. The inhuman screeches of the undead filled the air, their fingers scraping against the metal. "Shit," David panted. "They're everywhere." Jack turned to Elena, who was already scanning their surroundings. "We can cut through the alley." A voice interrupted them. "Drop your weapons." Jack spun, his heart hammering. 5 figures emerged from the shadows, all holding guns. They weren't infected. They were human. And from the look in their eyes, they were just as dangerous. Chris clenched his fists. Not happening. A man with a buzz cut, his face smeared with dirt and dried blood, stepped forward. "You're in our territory. That means everything you have now belongs to us." Jack gritted his teeth. "This is bad." Elena's hand drifted toward her belt, where a knife rested. Jack shot her a warning look. "Not yet." David shifted uneasily. "Look, we don't want trouble. We just..." The leader smirked. Too late. He raised his gun. Before Jack could react, the door behind them burst open. A flood of undead poured in, their rotting jaws snapping hungrily. And just like that, hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the alley as chaos consumed the small space. Jack barely had time to react before the first of the undead lunged at him, its yellowed teeth snapping just inches from his face. He swung his crowbar, feeling the sickening crunch of bone as the zombie's skull caved in. "Move," he shouted, but the alley was too tight, too cramped. Bodies, both living and dead, were colliding, fighting, clawing to survive. The gang leader fired his pistol into the horde, his men doing the same, but it wasn't enough. There were too many of them. Elena grabbed David's arm, yanking him toward a stack of crates. "Go up. Climb." David scrambled up first, his hands shaking as he pulled himself onto the rooftop. Jack followed, gripping the rough bricks and hauling himself up just as a pale, blood-stained hand reached for his ankle. Chris wasn't as lucky. A zombie tackled him from behind, sending him crashing to the ground. He roared in pain as it sank its teeth into his shoulder. "Chris!" Jack started to move, but Elena held him back. "It's too late," she said, her voice breaking. Chris let out a guttural scream, struggling as more zombies swarmed him. Jack could only watch as his friend disappeared beneath the gnashing, writhing mass of undead. The gang wasn't faring much better. One of their men went down with a shriek, his rifle clattering against the pavement. The leader shoved another toward the zombies to buy himself a second to run. Coward. Jack turned away, stomach twisting in disgust. That could have been us. Go, he told Elena and David. We can't stay here. They sprinted across the rooftop, jumping from building to building. The city was a maze of ruined structures, but they had one advantage: the undead weren't fast. The gang leader, somehow still alive, was running below them in the alley, guns swinging wildly as he tried to fight his way through. David glanced at Jack. We can help him. Jack's jaw tightened. He just sacrificed his own guy. What do you think he'll do to us? David hesitated. But Elena cut him off. No. We keep moving. The leader looked up at them, eyes wide with desperation. Wait. Don't. Jack turned away. A moment later, the zombies caught him. His screams were short-lived. They didn't stop running. An hour later, they found shelter in an abandoned apartment complex. Jack barricaded the door while Elena checked the windows. David sat on the floor, staring at his hands. We left him, he whispered. Jack exhaled, rubbing his face. We did. David looked up, something hard in his expression. How do we know we won't do the same to each other? Jack didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew the truth. In this world, trust was the most dangerous thing of all. Jack barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Chris's face, his agonized screams ringing in his ears. He should have done something. He should have saved him. But deep down, Jack knew the truth: there had been no saving Chris. Morning light seeped through the dust-covered windows of the abandoned apartment. The city outside was eerily quiet, save for the occasional distant groan of the undead. Elena sat near the window, scanning the streets below. We can't stay here, she said softly. We need food. Water. A plan. Jack nodded. He turned to David, who had barely spoken since last night. You holding up? David didn't look up. I'm fine. But his voice was hollow. Jack let it go. They were all on the edge, and there was no room for weakness. Elena pointed to a faded street sign below. Before everything fell apart, there was a gated community about 5 miles from here. I heard rumors that they had food and power. Jack frowned. Rumors don't mean much. It's better than waiting around to starve, she shot back. David finally looked up. If they have supplies, they'll also have guards. Jack sighed. Only one way to find out. They moved cautiously through the ruined city, keeping to alleys and side streets. The undead were slow, but the real threat was the living. It took them hours to reach the gates of Ashwood Estates. Jack's first thought was that it looked untouched, an eerie contrast to the devastation surrounding it. The tall steel gates stood firm, reinforced with barbed wire. Beyond them, rows of pristine houses sat in silence. Elena knocked on the gate. Hello? For a moment, nothing. Then, a voice crackled through a hidden speaker. State your business. Jack stepped forward. We need food. Water. Shelter. A long pause. Then the gate buzzed, and a metal door slid open. David hesitated. This feels too easy. Jack's gut told him the same thing. But they had no other options. They stepped inside. Inside, Ashwood Estates was pristine. The streets were clean, the houses intact. Solar panels lined rooftops, and people, actual people, walked about. An older man with graying hair approached them. He wore a military vest, his hand resting casually on a holstered pistol. Welcome to Ashwood. I'm Carter. We don't usually take in outsiders. Jack forced a smile. We're just looking for a safe place. Carter studied them. Then he nodded. We'll see what we can do. As they followed him deeper into the community, Jack noticed something unsettling. The people here, they weren't just survivors. They were too calm. Too orderly. Like they were hiding something. And Jack had a bad feeling they'd just walked into a trap. Jack's gut twisted as Carter led them deeper into Ashwood Estates. It was too perfect, too well maintained. In a world where everything had crumbled, this place stood untouched. That didn't happen by chance. People walked the streets with purpose, some tending to small gardens, others reinforcing barricades. They weren't starving, and they weren't desperate. That alone set them apart from every other group Jack had encountered. Elena leaned in, whispering, "Something's off." Jack gave a slight nod. "Stay sharp." Carter stopped in front of a large house near the center of the community. It looked like a repurposed town hall, with heavy steel reinforcements along the doors and windows. 2 armed guards stood at the entrance. "This is where we keep supplies," Carter said, motioning for them to follow him inside. Jack exchanged a glance with Elena and David before stepping in. The interior was just as unsettling as the rest of the town. The walls were lined with crates of canned food, bottles of water, even medical supplies. More than enough for a small army. Jack frowned. Where did they get all this? Carter turned, his expression unreadable. "We don't just hand out supplies. If you want to stay, you pull your weight." Jack folded his arms. "What kind of work?" Carter's lips curled into a smirk. "Security. We have rules here. People break them, and things get messy. That's where you'd come in." Jack's stomach churned. He's not talking about security. He's talking about enforcers. Elena's fingers twitched near her knife. She had caught on, too. David cleared his throat. "And if we don't want the job?" Carter shrugged. "Then you're free to leave. But you won't get any supplies. And you'll be on your own." Jack clenched his jaw. "They're not giving us a choice." Then, from outside, a scream. Jack spun as the sound of gunfire erupted in the distance. A guard rushed in, face pale. "We've got a breach, north wall. The Horde found us." Carter cursed. "Get everyone to the bunkers. Now." Jack didn't wait for an invitation. He grabbed Elena's arm. "We're leaving." Carter turned to him. "No. You're helping us fight." Jack barely heard him over the sound of the first explosion. The undead had arrived. Ashwood erupted into chaos. Jack and his group ran for cover as gunfire ripped through the air. The northern barricade was gone, reduced to twisted metal and flames. Dozens of zombies poured through, their inhuman shrieks blending with the panicked cries of survivors. Jack grabbed a rifle from a fallen guard and opened fire. The first bullet hit a zombie square in the forehead. It dropped instantly, but there were so many more. Carter barked orders to his men, but Jack didn't care. This was their problem. "Elena. David. We need to move." They sprinted toward the main gate, dodging panicked residents and the undead tearing into them. A woman fell beside them, a zombie ripping into her throat. Jack forced himself to keep going. There was no saving her. David skidded to a stop near a parked truck. "This could get us out of here." Jack yanked the door handle. Locked. "Elena, hotwire it." Elena ducked inside through a shattered window, working fast. Carter spotted them. "You're stealing our truck?" Jack leveled his rifle at him. "You wanted us to pull our weight? Consider this payback." Carter's eyes burned with fury, but before he could respond, a massive explosion rocked the ground. The Horde had reached the fuel reserves. Flames burst into the sky. The wall of fire sent zombies and humans alike flying, a shockwave tearing through the community. Jack barely had time to shield his face before a burning body crashed beside him. Elena got the engine roaring. "Get in. Now." Jack and David dove into the truck just as Carter and his men turned their weapons on them. Bang. Bullets pinged off the truck as Jack floored the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement, and then they were crashing through the front gates, plowing through anything in their path. A zombie smacked against the windshield, its face a ruined mess of blood and rot. Jack swerved hard, throwing it off. Elena looked back, watching Ashwood burn. We never should have come here. Jack exhaled, gripping the wheel tight. We made it out. That's what matters. David, shaking, stared at the firelit horizon. His voice was hollow. Where do we go now? Jack didn't have an answer. But one thing was clear, trusting people had nearly gotten them killed. Again. And next time, they might not be so lucky. Jack drove in silence, the truck's engine humming against the night. Ashwood Estates was nothing but a fiery glow in the distance now, smoke curling into the sky like a dying breath. David sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly ahead. Elena was in the back, reloading a pistol she had swiped before their escape. No one spoke. The weight of everything pressed against them. Chris was gone. They had barely made it out of Ashwood alive. And now, they were alone again. Jack exhaled sharply, gripping the wheel tighter. Trust had nearly gotten them killed. We need a plan, Elena finally said. David scoffed, running a hand down his face. A plan? Like last time? He turned, eyes dark. You said we needed a safe place. That place was a goddamn nightmare. Jack kept his gaze on the road. We didn't have a choice. David let out a bitter laugh. Yeah? And what happens next time? How many more times are we going to trust the wrong people? Jack had no answer. The road stretched ahead, an endless expanse of cracked asphalt and abandoned cars. The world was a wasteland. The undead weren't the biggest threat anymore. People were. They drove until the truck ran out of gas. Jack coasted it to a stop near a collapsed overpass. A rusted highway sign dangled from a broken post, reading, "Next exit, Haven Ridge." Elena leaned forward. Haven Ridge? David shook his head. I've heard of it. Used to be a quarantine zone early on. Military tried to set up a survivor camp there. Jack's stomach turned. And now? David exhaled. No one knows. But people stopped talking about it a long time ago. Jack glanced at the dwindling supplies in the back of the truck. They didn't have many options. We go on foot, he decided. David didn't argue. The walk to Haven Ridge was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that made the hairs on Jack's neck stand up. Rotting bodies lined the roads, some missing limbs, others nothing but skeletal remains. Whatever happened here, it had been brutal. Elena pointed to a crumbling gas station ahead. Let's check it out. Jack nodded, creeping toward the shattered doorway. The stench of death hit them immediately. The shelves were mostly bare, save for a few discarded cans and bottles. David found an old vending machine, smashing the glass with the butt of his rifle. He grabbed a few stale snack bars, tossing one to Jack. Jack caught it. Better than nothing. As he tore the wrapper open, a noise from the back of the store made them all freeze. A shuffle. A low, ragged breath. Elena raised her pistol. Jack motioned for silence. Then, a figure stumbled from the darkness. But it wasn't a zombie. It was a man. Thin. Malnourished. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt and dried blood. He blinked at them, wide-eyed and terrified. Jack's grip tightened on his crowbar. Who are you? The man held up his hands, voice hoarse. I don't want trouble. Elena didn't lower her gun. Are you alone? The man swallowed hard. Not exactly. Jack's gut clenched. What does that mean? Before the man could answer, a distant scream tore through the night. David spun toward the door. What the hell was that? The man paled. They found me. Jack didn't have time to ask who. Gunfire erupted outside. They hit the ground as bullets shattered the gas station windows. Move! Jack barked, yanking the stranger down behind a rusted shelf. Elena peeked out, cursing. 4, no, 5 of them. Armed. David swore under his breath. Great. Just great. Jack turned to the man. Who are they? The man's hands trembled. Raiders. He swallowed. I stole from them. Jack exhaled sharply. Of course he did. Outside, heavy boots crunched against the pavement. A gruff voice called out, we know you're in there, Ryan. You stole from us, and you think you can run? Ryan flinched. Please. They'll kill me. Jack gritted his teeth. Trust had gotten them nearly killed before. But leaving Ryan to die felt wrong. David locked eyes with Jack. We're not getting out of this without a fight. Jack's jaw tightened. He turned to Ryan. Can you shoot? Ryan hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, he pulled a pistol from his waistband. Jack nodded. Then let's make these bastards regret finding us. The first shadow passed the doorway. Jack didn't hesitate. He swung his crowbar with everything he had. Crack. The raider went down hard. Blood splattered against the wall. Then, chaos. Gunfire erupted again. Elena and David fired back, taking cover behind the shelves. The gas station became a war zone. A bullet whizzed past Jack's head, embedding into the wall behind him. Ryan let out a strangled cry, gripping his arm. He was hit. Jack grabbed him, pulling him to cover. Stay with me. Outside, one of the raiders shouted. Burn them out. Jack's stomach dropped. A Molotov cocktail sailed through the window. The bottle shattered. Fire erupted. The gas station was going up in flames. Jack grabbed Elena's arm. We're leaving. Now. David kicked open the back door, leading them into the night. Smoke filled Jack's lungs as they ran. Behind them, the gas station burned like a beacon in the darkness. And in the distance, more figures were watching. Jack's gut twisted. They weren't out of this yet. The fire raged behind them, thick black smoke curling into the night sky. The gas station was an inferno now, its glow casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Jack didn't stop to watch it burn. They sprinted into the darkness, the sounds of gunfire and screaming still ringing in their ears. Ryan stumbled beside Jack, clutching his wounded arm. Blood seeped through his fingers, dripping onto the pavement. His breathing was ragged, uneven. Elena grabbed him, pulling him forward. Keep moving, or you're dead. David glanced back. They're following. Jack didn't need to turn around to know it was true. The raiders weren't going to let them go. Not after killing some of their own. Not after burning down their hideout. Jack's heart pounded. We need cover. Elena pointed ahead. There, woods. A stretch of dead trees loomed in the distance, their skeletal branches reaching toward the sky. It wasn't much, but it was better than open ground. Jack pushed forward, lungs burning. They had to disappear before the raiders got their bearings. The first bullet whizzed past his ear. Then another. Elena cursed. Go, go, go! They hit the tree line just as a fresh burst of gunfire erupted behind them. Bark exploded from a nearby trunk as bullets ripped through the dead forest. Jack threw himself behind a fallen log, dragging Ryan down with him. Elena and David dove for cover nearby, their chests rising and falling in rapid bursts. David checked his rifle. How many? Jack stole a glance. Shapes moved between the burning wreckage and the road, figures stalking forward, weapons raised. 5, maybe 6, he muttered. They're spreading out. Elena swore under her breath. They're trying to flank us. Jack's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them in the open. Not with Ryan wounded. That meant they had only one choice. They had to fight. The first raider entered the tree line, rifle raised. Jack didn't hesitate. He raised his own gun and fired. The bullet caught the man in the chest, sending him sprawling. A second later, Elena took out another, her shot clean and precise. 2 down, David muttered. But the others were closing in fast. A raider ducked behind a tree, firing wildly. The bullets tore through the underbrush, forcing them lower. Ryan winced, gripping his bleeding arm. I can help." Jack shoved a pistol into his good hand. "Then shoot." Ryan nodded, face pale. Elena took another shot. A scream echoed through the trees. Then, silence. Jack's breathing was ragged. His grip tightened around his rifle. Were they dead? Or just waiting? Then, crack. A footstep behind them. Jack spun. Too late. A raider tackled him to the ground. Jack hit the dirt hard. The world blurred for a second. Pain exploded across his ribs. The raider loomed over him, raising a rusted machete. Jack barely rolled in time. The blade buried itself in the dirt inches from his face. Adrenaline surged. Jack kicked out, sending the raider sprawling. He lunged forward, swinging his crowbar. Crack. The raider's skull caved in. Blood splattered across the dead leaves. Jack staggered back, chest heaving. Then, another gunshot. David had taken down the last one. Silence fell over the woods. Elena scanned the treeline, gun still raised. No more movement. No more raiders. Jack exhaled. "Is that all of them?" David nodded. "For now." Ryan let out a shaky breath. His face was pale, his wounded arm trembling. We need to go." Jack agreed. The gunfire would draw more than just raiders. It would bring them. They moved deeper into the woods, exhaustion pressing down on them. Ryan was struggling, his injuries slowing him down. Jack stole a glance at Elena. "How bad is it?" She pulled his sleeve back, wincing. "Not good. He's losing too much blood." Ryan let out a weak laugh. "Not my best day." Jack frowned. They needed supplies, bandages, antibiotics, something to keep him alive. David pointed ahead. There. Through the trees, a building loomed in the darkness. A church. The roof had partially caved in, and the stained glass windows were shattered, but the structure still stood. Jack hesitated. "Think it's safe?" Elena checked her ammo. Only one way to find out. The church was silent. Jack stepped inside, boots crunching against broken glass. Moonlight filtered through the shattered windows, casting eerie shadows across the pews. A rusted cross still hung at the front. Ryan slumped against a wall. "I just need a minute." Jack nodded, motioning for David to check the back rooms. Elena found a cabinet near the altar, prying it open. She let out a small gasp. "What?" Jack asked. She held up a small first aid kit. "Looks like someone left this behind." Jack exhaled in relief. "Good. Let's patch him up." Elena got to work, cleaning Ryan's wound as he gritted his teeth. Jack turned to David. "See anything?" David shook his head. "Empty." Jack sighed, running a hand down his face. They needed a plan. But before he could say anything, a sound echoed through the church. A low groan. Jack's blood ran cold. Elena froze. "Please tell me that was the wind." David raised his rifle. "No. That was something else." Then, bang. Something slammed against the doors. A second later, another. Jack's stomach twisted. They weren't alone. Elena whispered, "How many?" Jack didn't answer. Because now, through the broken windows, he could see them. Dozens of them. The dead had found them. And this time, there was nowhere left to run. The first thud against the church doors was almost hesitant, like the dead outside were testing the wood, sniffing for weakness. Then came another. And another. Jack gripped his crowbar tighter, heart pounding. They had to move. Now. Elena scanned the broken windows, eyes narrowing. We're surrounded. David cursed under his breath. Figures. Ryan, pale and shaking from blood loss, let out a weak laugh. Guess this isn't a safe house after all. Jack ignored him, looking at the doors. The barricade wouldn't last long. The rotted wood was already splintering. We need an exit, he said. David pointed toward the back. There's a storage room. Might be another way out. Elena was already moving, pulling Ryan up. Let's go. The doors shuttered behind them, the groans of the undead growing louder. Jack didn't wait to see how much longer they had. He followed. The storage room was small, dusty shelves, broken pews, an old altar covered in cobwebs. And at the far end, a door. Jack grabbed the handle and twisted. Locked. Of course. David stepped up. Move. He lifted his rifle and fired. The boom echoed through the church, the lock splintering apart. Jack shoved the door open. The cold night air hit him like a slap. But so did something else. A corpse. Hanging from the rafters, swaying gently in the breeze. Jack's stomach twisted. The man had been dead a long time, his body little more than bones wrapped in torn clothing. Elena barely spared it a glance. Move. Jack did. Beyond the church, the woods stretched into the darkness. And for now, the dead weren't there. They ran. Ryan struggled, his wounds slowing him down, but Elena kept him moving. Jack didn't look back. He could hear the church doors breaking, the undead flooding inside. Gunfire rang out. David, covering their escape. Jack turned just in time to see him take out the first one through the door. Then the second. But there were too many. Jack grabbed his arm. Come on. David didn't argue. They sprinted into the woods, the screams of the undead chasing them into the night. They ran until their legs burned. Until their lungs ached. Until the sounds of the dead faded behind them. Then, finally, they stopped. Jack doubled over, hands on his knees, gasping for breath. Elena leaned against a tree, face pale. That was too close. Ryan slumped to the ground, barely conscious. His breathing was shallow, his face damp with sweat. Jack knelt beside him. He wasn't going to last much longer. David paced, scanning the trees. We need shelter. Somewhere to regroup. Jack nodded. And fast. Elena straightened, looking ahead. Then we keep moving. Jack followed her gaze. There, through the trees, a building. Barely visible in the moonlight. But it was there. A chance. Maybe. Jack exhaled. Let's go. They had no other choice. The building was a house. Old. Abandoned. The windows were shattered, the door barely hanging on its hinges. But it was standing. Jack stepped inside first, crowbar raised. The air was stale, thick with dust. No movement. No sounds. David followed, rifle ready. Looks clear. Elena pulled Ryan in, easing him onto an old couch. Jack moved through the house, checking the rooms. It was empty. Safe. For now. An hour later, they had barricaded the door and set up a small fire in the fireplace. Ryan lay on the couch, breathing shallow but steady. Elena had done what she could, but they all knew he needed real help. Jack stared into the fire, mind racing. David sat across from him, cleaning his rifle. We can't keep running forever. Jack nodded. I know. Elena looked up. Then what do we do? Jack clenched his jaw. They had no food. No supplies. No safe place to go. And the dead were everywhere. But then, Ryan stirred. His voice was weak, but clear. Haven Ridge, he whispered. Jack frowned. What? Ryan swallowed hard. That quarantine zone. The one we talked about before. David shook his head. It's a graveyard. Ryan's gaze was sharp, even through his pain. Maybe. But if anyone's alive, if there's any kind of supplies left, he coughed, wincing. It's our best shot. Jack looked at Elena. Then at David. No one spoke. But the answer was clear. Jack exhaled. Haven Ridge. It was a risk. A big one. But it was their only hope. Jack stood. Then that's where we're going. No one argued. Because there was nothing left for them here. And maybe, just maybe, there was something waiting for them there. The night air was cold against Jack's skin as they moved through the ruined landscape. The trees thinned, giving way to broken roads and crumbling buildings. Haven Ridge was still miles away, but it might as well have been another world. Ryan was barely conscious, slumped between Jack and Elena as they helped him walk. His wound was festering, and every step was a battle. David led the way, scanning the surroundings with his rifle raised. We should be close to the outer perimeter. Jack squinted ahead. In the distance, he could see faint silhouettes of barricades, fences tangled with rusted barbed wire. Haven Ridge. Or what was left of it. The closer they got, the worse it looked. The outer wall had collapsed in several places, and the checkpoint booths were abandoned, riddled with bullet holes. David muttered, no signs of life. Jack wasn't surprised. Haven Ridge had been one of the last major quarantine zones before everything fell apart. If there were survivors here, they were either hiding, or worse. Ryan groaned, his legs giving out. Elena barely caught him. We don't have time to hesitate. If there's anything left, we need to find it, now. Jack nodded, tightening his grip on his crowbar. Let's move. Inside the perimeter, the streets were silent. Too silent. The buildings loomed like tombstones, their windows shattered, doors left ajar as if people had fled in a panic. David checked a few abandoned cars, rummaging through glove compartments. Nothing. Jack scanned the area. The air smelled of rot and decay. The whole place was a graveyard. Then, a noise. Soft. Barely there. A rustling sound, like something shifting in the dark. Jack raised a hand. Wait. Elena stopped. David tensed. Jack listened, heart hammering. There it was again, a scrape, a shuffle. Not a raider. Not an animal. Jack knew that sound too well. It was the dead. David swore under his breath. We need to find shelter. Fast. Jack scanned the street. There, an old hospital. The windows were smashed, but the front doors were intact. Elena saw it too. Might be medical supplies inside. Jack didn't hesitate. Let's go. Inside the hospital, the air was thick with dust. Jack's boots crunched on broken glass as he stepped inside, weapon raised. Old bloodstains smeared the walls. Empty gurneys were overturned in the hallways. Ryan barely clung to consciousness as Elena helped him forward. Stay with me, she whispered. Jack turned to David. We need to find the supply room. David nodded and took point. They moved cautiously, the building eerily still. Then, a growl. Jack froze. A shadow lurched from a side room, the unmistakable staggering, hungry movement of a walker. David fired before Jack could react. The shot rang out, echoing through the halls. The walker collapsed. Silence followed. Then, more groans. From every direction. Elena cursed. We just rang the dinner bell. Jack gritted his teeth. Find the meds. Now. David kicked open a door labeled storage. Inside, shelves of supplies were scattered, many already looted. Elena found a small case, tearing it open. Bandages. Painkillers. Antibiotics. Got it, she shouted. Jack grabbed Ryan, dragging him toward the exit. But the hallway was already full. Dozens of them. Dead eyes. Rotting flesh. Jack's stomach twisted. No way out. David fired. Elena fired. The dead kept coming. Jack clenched his crowbar, eyes darting around. There had to be another way. Then, he saw it. A stairwell. Upstairs, he shouted. They ran, Ryan barely holding on as they sprinted up the stairs. The dead followed, their shrieks echoing through the hospital. Jack shoved the door open to the rooftop. The cold air hit him as they stumbled outside. A dead end. Or was it? David ran to the edge. Ladder. Leads to the next building. Jack didn't hesitate. Go! Elena went first, then Ryan. David followed. Jack turned. The first walker burst through the door. No time. He ran, grabbing the ladder, barely making it across as the dead swarmed the rooftop behind him. They reached the next building, collapsing onto the floor, breathing hard. Ryan was still alive, barely. Elena tore open the medical kit, treating his wound. Jack exhaled. We made it. David wiped sweat from his brow. For now. They weren't safe. Not yet. But they had hope. And in this world. That was enough. End of Part 8.